Mr. Angus Brendan MacNeil.
Tablet, Mr. Speaker. This debate, in essence, boils down to UK RAF jets going into Syria, into a war that is already in existence, a multi-cornered, a multifaceted war. It probably, as has been mentioned, is not the great squadrons that are imagined in the press or in the minds of the public as a result of what's been put into their minds from the press. It is, as we've heard, 8 jets, and as the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee told me, probably 2 active at any one time on any day in Syria. For context, that we have been, I'm grateful to the member for Brighton Pavilion for this, there have been 57,000 sorties flown in Syria, with 8,000 of those dropping bombs in 17 months. That's 113 sorties a day, with 16 of those sorties dropping bombs. We're going to deflect what we're doing in Iraq. 10% of the sorties flown in Iraq are by the UK. I asked the Prime Minister last week if bombing Syria would mean he'd be bombing ISIL less in Iraq. He's made that choice to bomb ISIL in Iraq. Would he be bombing them less or not? He couldn't answer. I'm afraid that is something the Prime Minister should have been able to do, but wasn't able to do. The Prime Minister then claimed he would have 75,000 free Syrian troops. But I have to tell the House that the Americans tried to raise a force of moderates and mobilise them, but it failed. According to David Waring on CNN from the University of London, who lectures in Middle East politics, the US initiative to stand up a 15,000-strong moderate force to confront ISIS recently collapsed in failure. In fact, they only managed to put a half-dozen troops onto the battlefield. 6 onto the battlefield. I agree with the honourable gentleman.
The one issue that doesn't seem to feature in his discourse or that of any of the members of his party is what would have happened if there had been no intervention in Iraq at all. Because surely the consequences might well have been that Daesh would have spread very quickly and in fact caused a generalised conflict. And it's ignoring that point, which seems to be remarkably selective on the part of those who are arguing that we shouldn't be taking further steps now. And I'd be very grateful if you cared to address it.
Well, the honourable gentleman might like to know about interventions in Iraq, and the award-winning journalist this year, Martin Chukov, and I think it is an Australian who works at The Guardian, just got the award from the Foreign Press Association after speaking to ISIS commanders, has noted from them that they were incubated in Iraq in the camps of the Americans. That is what intervention has done, and the honourable gentleman knows full well that is the result of intervention. I'm very grateful. Only 2 months ago, we have to notice, well, only 2 months ago, one of the central views of the US and its allies was that Russian involvement in Syria would only fuel more radicalism and extremism. Mehdi Hassan in The Guardian noted the UN's Defence Secretary Ashton Carter warned that the consequences for Russia will itself to become rightfully fearful of terrorism. The point that is almost centred in public debate here in the UK and in this House, and the discourse, is that involvement in disastrous wars increases, not decreases, threats to us in the West. And I'm also grateful to Mehdi Hassan for reporting the words of the retired US General Mike Flynn around the US Defence Intelligence Agency. The more bombs we drop, that just fuels the conflict. That is a very, very hard truth for some to hear, but it is indeed the truth. Indeed, the war on terror started by George W. Bush was straight from the must-do-something school of thought, a school of thought that is all too prevalent, Mr. Speaker, in this House today. It turned a few hundred terrorists in the Hindu Kush into a force of 100,000 almost globally, certainly active in 20 countries. It had classic recruiting tactics of the unjust war in Iraq based on lies. 12 years ago, the must-do-something rhetoric in the UK at the time talked of appeasement, trying to conjure images of Neville Chamberlain. But all the while, the unseen appeasement then was that of George Bush by the poodle that we had as the UK leader, Tony Blair. As the writer Jürgen Tortelhofer said in a recent article in The Guardian, war is a boomerang that will come back and hit us in the form of terrorism. And we have to be honest about that very real possibility with the people. The Daily Telegraph said as much very recently about the crash of the Russian Metrojet in Egypt. That was, said the Telegraph, as a direct consequence of Russia's involvement in Syria, indicating further that perhaps Putin had incited this attack on the Russians. We have to be very sure what we can see in the eyes of others we're seeing in our own eyes. So what have we got in Syria? We have 10 countries bombing, Kurds fighting, the Free Syrian Army fighting, which, as the chairman of the Defence Select Committee told us earlier, is a rag bag of 58 separate factions. We have Assad, we've got Daesh, ISIL. Meanwhile, significantly, Russia bombs our allies, but we are looking like we won't or can't bomb theirs. We then have the Turkey bombing a Russian plane. They're also bombing the Kurds. When they bombed the Russian plane, they were taunted by the Greeks, both in NATO. Throw in America, France, the UK, the regional powers, and we have the powder keg of 1914 that we seem blissfully unaware of. All in all, we have a debate here about two jets that is taking us in to a situation we shouldn't be going into. I'm against this, as you can see, in many ways, but I'm also, I would like to say, against this in the way the government are doing it and handling it. They should have had given more time for this. They shouldn't have bumped the House on this yesterday. They know that full well. And the final point is the UK is caught between its time of emperor and Eisenhower's military-industrial complex, giving an urge to the people here that something must be done, even if it's the wrong thing.